right, everybody. Welcome to the FCA Locker Room, the show where we explore how faith and sports come together to transform lives on and off the field. I'm one of your hosts, Vincenzo Pepe. I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Nick Diluggo. He is our Eastern Connecticut Director for FCA. And today, our topic is going to be finding balance and priorities as a coach. We know that coaches of pretty much all levels can sometimes struggle with their identity when it comes to coaching, or how do they balance their work and their life, their home life back at home during the season, and sometimes even that spills into other areas of their life. So Nick has a really great story and a great testimony to this, and I think this is going to be really helpful to our listeners and our coaches specifically. But Nick, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Vincenzo.
So we're gonna just right off the bat, we're gonna hit you with a hard icebreaker question, the toughest one of the day, probably. All right. So if you could coach, I know you've coached different sports before, but if you could coach any sport at any level, anywhere in the world, even if you had no experience with that sport whatsoever, what would it be and why?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I think I'd want to coach um in the final four uh in the championship game with like 2 minutes left. That's where I'd want to be.
That's a tough one, man. That's a good one.
I've never been a basketball coach, but like I feel like that's where I'd want to be,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
listen, the question gave you room to dream, so that's a cool one. That's a cool one. I like
Mm.
that. So tell us a little bit, tell us our listeners a little bit about yourself. Give us, some of your coaching background.
Yeah, so I was a head coach for 15 years in Connecticut at the high school level for indoor track, outdoor track, and cross country for boys and girls. Um, Loved it. Had a really fun time. Um, Coaching basically year round for 15 years, and it was cool. I was pretty young when I took over. I want to say I was probably 27, 26, and we took over a program that really hadn't had a whole lot of success kind of coming in. So kind of no one was really paying attention to what we were doing. There was literally no expectations on us. It was just like field the team, you know. And within about 5 years, we won a team title and became a pretty successful program in the state. So, and after my time was done coaching, I came on staff at FCA. So that's my coaching background.
Yeah. I think it's exciting sometimes. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but I think it's kind of exciting as for a coach to be able to take a program that honestly, like in the past, has not been very good. Like you said, there's really no expectations because there's really only one way to go, right? And that's kind of up. But then at the same time, you probably got to, kind of create a culture and expectations and standards that maybe weren't there in the past. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's funny. Yesterday I stopped by at my old stomping ground, so it was really I'm blessed. Like the the head coach that took over for me and his assistant coach were captains of mine, right? So I got to hand the program off to guys that I really love and trust. And we were talking about culture, and they were concerned about lost culture, right? And not that they've lost it, but like they brought that up, and we talked about just making sure that you're guiding the team clearly towards what you're marching towards, um and when a coach has a vision and he or she is really clear with like articulating it, man, you'd be surprised like how much kids will buy into that, especially if the messaging is consistent and you're consistent, so you're right, like it's cool to help build culture and watch it grow and see dreams, for the team actualized. It's fun.
That's awesome that you got to hand it off to, former athletes that you coach. I mean, that doesn't always happen, obviously. And I feel like as coaches, one thing that kind of holds us back from moving on from coaching is we're like, oh, we really want the right person to kind of take over because, you've put a lot into this program and you don't want to see, their new direction definitely needs to take place, obviously some new things, but you don't want to see everything that you worked so hard for over those years kind of go to the wayside. So that's a really unique opportunity, I feel like, and probably something most coaches would hope would be the case. If it's not an athlete, hopefully it's maybe like your assistant coach or someone like that is taking over. But that's a neat situation. So um, we're gonna dive into this next question, probably answering it more throughout the rest of this episode. But just right off the top of your head, what's one thing that coaching has taught you about life outside of sports?
That there are more important things than than sports.
Mm,
Like uh, man, like we love sports, right? Like we otherwise I don't think we'd be really coaches. Um, but I really learned that even things that we love can they can sidetrack us sometimes. Um, and sports is one of those things that I mean I can't remember a time when sports wasn't a part of my life. I loved sports and I loved winning. I loved competing. Even in a way, like I didn't even mind losing sometimes because there, I knew I was growing from it. I liked I didn't like losing, but I liked competition. I didn't like an easy win, and that no one ever likes an easy win, right? But one thing that sports has taught me is that like, and there's so much more outside of sports that's more important. And uh, sometimes inside of sport, we can just get so caught up with the win. We can get so caught up with the things that the win is gonna bring us that it really sidetracks us. So I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned as
yeah.
being a coach.
And I think sometimes we have to learn that the hard way as a coach,
Mm.
or maybe like not that we have to, but oftentimes we do learn that the hard way, right? And sometimes it's because maybe our family at home is going to the wayside a little bit, or our marriages are going to the wayside, or just our personal life in general is kind of and put it on the back burner for an entire season. And then for somebody like yourself who was coaching during multiple seasons over the year, that just kind of compounds and compounds and compounds until your entire year is kind of consumed by that stuff. And so hopefully that's a little bit of what we're going to be able to break down today. Because believe it, you're not the only coach that's ever gone through this stuff. I'm sure most coaches are struggling with this topic specifically. So, with that being said, let's just dive right into it. You know, I think there's a lot of pressure on coaches, or coaches feel a lot of pressure oftentimes that they have to win, they have to succeed. If it's at the high school level, it's how many kids am I going to get to go to college, or how many state champions am I going to have, and stuff like that. But where does that pressure really come from? Does it come from the school, the program, the athletes, the parents, or maybe it's something that the coach is putting on themselves?
I think it really depends. It depends on the coach. The pressure is always going to be there. No matter what, there's going to in coaching, um, especially I believe the higher the level you go, there's going to be tension. There's going to be pressure, right? One of the really good things I took away from an FCA training recently was that there's going to be tension. We just need to learn how to manage it, right? And I think it depends on the outlook of the individual coach. It really depends on, I think, sometimes why the coach is even going into it in the first place. Um, I know for me, the pressure was more internal, like it was an internal pressure. I felt like, especially when I first started out and no one really, for lack of a better term, like no one was really putting pressure on our program to succeed. There really was no expectation, right? But I think a lot of it comes from internal, and we can manage that better if we have a better understanding of why we're doing it all in the first place, right? And understanding what the expectations really are grounded in.
So, do you think, early on, it sounds like when your coaching career is kind of where you're trying to find, yourself as a coach, and some of how that worked out. Obviously, that developed over the years, but would you say in the beginning you were more of a win at all cost coach, or was that not really, in your mind?
Um, I think at the beginning, uh, I went into it because I wanted to help athletes, kids be better athletes and to do well in the sport and help them be better people. Like I literally, I had never coached before. right? So and as a Christian coach, I was kind of going into this just from the backdrop of like, okay, like, you know, God's brought me to this school for a reason and to coach these kids for a reason. So I want to help them be good at the sport, and I want to help them be better people. Um, but that changed, for me, um, as we got better, and I didn't even realize it was changing until way further down the road
Hmm.
for myself.
Yeah, I think, I, I I like to believe, and this could just me being kind of naive, but I like to think that most coaches get into coaching with the idea and the mindset of I want to do this to help better these athletes, help better these kids, you know. But somewhere along the line, I do feel many of us tend to lose that, and we're using that as the excuse, right, of to pour more into this coaching, right? I gotta stay up late at night. I have to watch film. I have to, you know, do strategy. You have to stay late after practice, and some of that stuff is good and it's warranted and it's needed to coach. But I think a lot of us kind of use that as the excuse to then say, um, uh, just pouring yourself in, and then I think that's where the win at all cost mentality for a lot of coaches kind of comes into play. Is you've kind of lost why you started coaching in the first place,
Mm.
or even not even just where you started, but what you can be doing as a coach, right? And we know with FCA, we're telling our coaches all the time, it's like, hey, there's a bigger purpose to your coaching and your influence than how fast someone's going to run the 100 meter, right, or whatever it might be.
Right.
And but I do think, what do you think? Do you think a lot of coaches that at least kind of get into the sport just because they love the sport and they want to help out athletes?
Yeah, no, I believe that. I believe, I mean, look, unfortunately, you do have some paycheck coaches, right? People who are just they're
Of
taking
course.
a job to supplement income. I don't think most coaches are like that, though. You know, I think most coaches are in it for a reason, right? Love of the sport, love of the kids, love of the town, whatever it may be, right? But yeah, like this was especially tricky for me because I'm a relationship person. I'm a motivator. Before I coached and before I was in teaching, I was in the army. So uh, I learned how to motivate people, and I'm a relationship person. So you talk about how that. All right, I think a lot of us go in with that mindset of like, let's be good people and help them just improve and be better. I had a really hard time with discerning like how much of this was like me being motivating and helpful for them as the person, and how much of it was for me to really make them like a better performer. So that was a tricky line for me. It really was. And when I realized that winning and achievement had become kind of a top priority, that I struggled with that for many years because I wanted relationships to be first. That's the kind of person I am. I wanted the relationship to be first. But that achievement bar, that achievement mentality had worked its way into my identity as a coach and as a person, and there was a struggle there.
Yeah, I think you know I just did a coaching clinic last month with a bunch of maybe a dozen or so coaches, and I kind of asked them the question. I put it out there. Was one of the first things we talked about was, hey, why did you get into coaching in the first place? And it's kind of interesting to kind of hear, because for me, with FCA and my position and my desire to see coaches use their platform, right, for to grow the kingdom and to be a witness, right. I almost don't really care why they got into coaching. I just care that they're there. But it is always interesting because some coaches are honest and they're like, well, I kind of got into this because, it was some extra money at school, right? Or some of them say, I don't really know much about the sport, but, my son's team needed a volunteer coach and I figured I'd rather do it than somebody else. Some people, they love the game so much they can't get away from it. So I think that plays a part of why we're coaching in the first place, because if the motives are right, you want to be there, you love the sport, you love the athletes, you love teaching, you love those things, like that makes it an easier transition for everything. But if in there for not necessarily the wrong reasons, but maybe not those pure reasons, then you definitely have a little bit of a journey and self-reflection to go on, to kind of get to
Mm.
the next level of, this isn't just a task. This is part of who I am. And I think, I love that part. I love asking coaches like, "Hey, why'd you get into coaching in the first place?" And it's usually, most of them give the typical answers, but it is pretty interesting. And I agree with you when you say the achievement piece at some point is what we're all seeking as coaches. Whether you're winning you have a winning program, and every year you guys are top seeded or whatever it might be. Obviously, you're always chasing that because you don't want to lose that. But even for the teams that like really are not very good year over year, the achievement is still what they're chasing, because that coach is like, we got to get there. We're almost there. We're getting there, and that can eat you alive.
Mm.
And I think that does add to the pressure that we tend to probably put on ourselves, more than anything else. But um, what happens when coaching becomes an idol for somebody, or maybe what are some signs that your coaching is becoming an idol for somebody?
Oh man. Well, I'm laughing because I know I've shared my story with you, right?
And
And
that's why I'm asking.
yeah, oh man. It happens for me at least, it happened in a real sneaky way. Um, our success built over probably a period of about 5 or 6 years. And then basically like we won a state title almost every year for like, I think like 4 or 5 years. Um, and before I knew it, I I I had really like coaching had become an idol. One sign was that like it it had really become my identity. It's like it had really become what I responded most to, right? So like I was responding more as coach than I was as any other role I had in my life, right? Husband, father, servant of Christ. Like I was really responding as coach first. Um, some people in my life, specifically family, they started to they knew how much I loved it, right? And they knew how good I was at it, but they started to hint at, hey, like things seem off with how much time you're spending doing this, and yeah, I was kind of when you're in denial about something and several people are telling you, like that's a hint right there. If you're hearing the same thing from trusted people, you know, and if you're denying it, again, that's another sign. Um, but then my family, who, my wife was my assistant coach for years. My kids were around the team a lot when they were younger. Like they started to really hate what I was doing. That was a sign. And then I think one of the worst is like bringing coaching activities to non-coaching places, right? Like if you're supposed to be at church, you shouldn't be looking up training plans, right? If you're supposed, and like I say that, I literally I did that, right? When you're watching a movie on the couch with the family, you should be focused on the family, and you should be focused on what you guys are doing, and not coming up with next week's schedule, right? Or looking at a video, or you know, and for me, I just found like the master of my time was my coaching, right? And it really brings to the forefront, um, Matthew 6:21, where it says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will also be, right? And you know, the treasure of my heart was my coaching. So, and I think most coach, and I knew it too. Like I started to put all those pieces together, and I knew it, and I didn't really want to initially confront that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, I mean, this is something that you were passionate about. Like you love to coach, like you were good at it, right? And so,
Right.
you know, um, you did find that relational piece in there. You felt like this is where you were called to be for that season and things like that. So it's very easy to make that the number one priority. I mean, it's not like just this doesn't happen with just coaching. This happens with a lot of different jobs or a lot of different hobbies or whatever it might be, right? That we make that our idol. But it is difficult when it's something that we're passionate about, that we're good at, that we're seeing results in, not just for ourselves, but for the people that we're coaching, to not let it get to that place. And I think you're right. I think a lot of coaches probably see it and they know it, but they're in denial about it themselves, and they're just not willing to say it or not willing to admit it because they don't want to be that coach that put other kids above their kids, or the time commitment to their team and their sport rather than their other responsibilities at home and their marriages and really different relationships. And I think it's a slippery slope. It's tough. Some of us are called to be coaches for probably our life, and we have to balance those things. But what helped you kind of, as you started to realize that, was it then that you started to try and find a better work-life balance? Or was that kind of, as you realized that was your cue to say, all right, hey, I need to step out of this role?
That's a great question. There were a bunch of things. I mean, first and foremost, man, like, um, most really good coaches have amazing wives, that are supporting them. And my wife, man, she knew how much I loved coaching, right? She saw the passion. She saw that I was helping kids, and that I was doing a lot of good. But she also saw that I just didn't have my I was way out of balance, right? My life was just so out of balance. And she was patient with me. And obviously she was praying for me. And it was funny. The more the more we seem to win, the the more I seem to realize how, this is gonna sound so weird as a coach, but like how little it really mattered, you know? Um, and so then I brought it to the Lord. Like I began praying about it. That's where I think a lot of it started, was just submitting that to the Lord in prayer and just saying, all right, like I get it. A lot of people are talking to me about this, and I'm seeing it, and I'm watching my kids, and I'm and my family, and I'm seeing how I'm not really being the man I should be for my family. So, um, enough with the excuses about it. Like, I'll just call it an idol. Like, this is an idol, right? And the Lord really began to work on my heart, there. Um, when COVID happened, this is right before COVID, probably about 6 months to 9 months before COVID. And then during COVID, it it was staring me in the face,
Mm.
right? Like by government order, right? I was home, and coaching was ripped from me, right? And I tried, I think every coach tried to do the online training, and they tried to keep connected with their athletes, but like COVID was such a important, that lockdown part was such an important part of my life, because the Lord used that time for me to be like, all right, like look around you. Um, this is your family. This is what's important. It's not your athletes are, they're great, but you need to you need to win here. Um, and when we came back from COVID, I knew, like, I just felt like the Lord was telling me I needed to like step down. And I hung on for one more year, and our boys track team won states in 2021. And I remember, like, it was a great thing. Don't get me wrong. Like, it was an awesome honor, but like, it just inside, I was like, all right, like if this is it, then yeah, I'm not sacrificing I'm not sacrificing my family for this.
Yeah.
Um, Something that I think is really important, though, that I want to make sure I say today, um, about, because if there's a coach listening to this that's struggling with, coaching as an idol in their life, um, it was for like the Lord led me down this path of giving up my coaching. And that might not necessarily be what everybody has to do, because at the end of the day, I feel like the Lord showed me that the idol actually really wasn't coaching per se. It was how coaching made me feel. That was really the root of my problem, right? Um, my motives were the problem. My heart posture was the problem. My priorities were the problem, and how I wasn't really using the platform was the problem, right? So coaching, I think, in itself is really good, and that's one of the reasons, like, you and I are in this ministry, right? Like, we see the power of the coach and how a platform used for Christ can be an amazing way to transform people, not only as people, but also as athletes, right? Um, so I just felt like it was important. Like, if you're feeling as a coach, like, man, that's me, Nick. Like, I'm doing all those things. That doesn't mean you need to give up coaching. That just means, all right, like look at the root of why coaching is an idol right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
That's
right. I mean,
important.
it is because someone might hear this and be like, "Oh, like, well, this is my sign to just step away from coaching," and maybe it is. But we're not saying like, "Hey, like you can't coach and have a family. You can't coach and have a personal life." Like, we're not saying that because you can, right? Like, there are ways to do that. But for some people, like you, it was time to step away from that, and now you're still you're kind of coaching in a different role now, right? You're coaching
Oh
coaches
yeah,
in a sense with FCA,
yeah,
right? And that's what we get to
right.
do. So let's talk to those coaches right now that maybe they are struggling with this a little bit and they don't want to leave coaching, right? That's where they're meant to be perhaps. But let's maybe talk about a little practical strategy on how to find that balance. So what are maybe do you have any time management or
Mm.
ways to set boundaries between the two?
Yeah. So, like, and just to be clear, right? I when we came back from COVID, I coached for about 2 more years. I did one more full year of cross country, indoor and outdoor track, and then I did another year of just indoor and outdoor track. And post COVID, I was a different coach. And I put these things that we're going to talk about were things that I put into play as a coach. That I was a better, I was a better husband. I was a better father. I was a better coach, actually. Um, but I wanted to make sure I kind of articulated that. But I think one thing to do if you're struggling in those areas, and I have a bunch of different things. If you want to stop me to ask about any of them, that's fine, or I can just list them off. But um, you know, bring it to prayer. Like, if you're feeling like this is an area that I'm recognizing that I'm struggling, bring it to prayer. If you're married, have that conversation with your spouse. Like, and say, look, honey, I don't know, like, I'm just feeling like my priorities are off, and I just want to let you know that I'm feeling that and that I'm praying about that. That opens the door to conversations, and your spouse being there to be helpful in that. I also would recommend an accountability partner, um, someone that knows that you're struggling with your balance. I would recommend somebody inside the coaching world and someone outside. So have one in and one out. So if you have an assistant coach or a head coach of another sport or an athletic director that you trust, let them know, like, hey, look, like, I'm going to be making some changes with the amount of time I'm spending, and so, like, would you kind of be, my wingman here on that? And then somebody that's not in the coaching world at all,
Hmm.
maybe uh, someone in your church that's a trusted friend or someone in the family. So they're asking from a non-coach's perspective, right? Because people who don't coach or have no athletic experience at all, they won't see things the same way, and I think they're a little bit more concrete, right? Whereas a coach may be like, "Oh yeah, I understand why you broke that boundary this time because it's league championship, so of course you're going to break that boundary, right?" Whereas somebody else is going to be like, "Hey, bro, you said no, and this means no." Um, if you're a head coach or even an assistant with a lot of responsibilities, also start delegating some of your coaching responsibilities. You don't have to do it all yourself. Find volunteers to help you. If you have good, trusted parents and you're able to, try to delegate some responsibilities to either assistants, volunteers, or trusted, captains on a team. Another thing that I did those last 2 years, strict parameters on time, both in practice, game, and personal time. And then ask somebody to hold you accountable there. I call it declaring your borders, right? Like you got to declare your borders. And that's tough at first. And as a coach, if you were all accessible, always there, no matter when, and you go to a declare your borders state, like that's tough because the phone rings and you're like, I got to answer it. I got to always be there for them. It's like, well, listen, there's sometimes you're going to be there, but there's also sometimes that it's for your son or it's for your wife or it's for your church, it's for your ministry. And like, you have to know that there's going to be somebody else. Right. And if not, and if if they really need you, they'll send you a text. And if the text makes it that it's so important and you need to break that exception, then you do it. But have someone there to hold you accountability for your time. And then if none of those things are really working, then, maybe consider a temporary change in responsibility. Like I'm shifting from being a head coach to an assistant, or if you're an assistant going from 6 days to 3 days or paid to volunteer, but those are definite strategies that I used.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of this is kind of resonating with me, and because this past fall, I kind of was my last season coaching baseball, and I've coached these boys for a couple of years now, and I've been coaching pretty much for the last almost 9 years, I guess. And this fall, I just I kind of came to the conclusion. I was just like, all right, I'm gonna put my coaching hat away for a little while. I'm not gonna. I'm sure I'm gonna coach again in the future. I have a daughter now. She's 1 year old. At some point she's gonna want to play sports, and I'm sure I'm gonna want to coach and things like that. But for me, I just felt like I was kind of straining myself in a lot of ways. It's a big commitment, and I was just doing club ball, so I wasn't even doing school ball where it was every day or anything like that. But it was just a big commitment. I mean, it was every weekend over. It was probably like the span of 16 weekends or something like that, maybe a little bit more. And it's a lot traveling, and we had the little one, and balancing it with work and practices and all these different things. And so for me, it was just, hey, like I love coaching. Like this is what I want to do. And it wasn't that I felt it was an idol or anything for me, but I just kind of came to the conclusion of myself of, you know what, I see the warning signs that I talk to people about, a lot about, and that I've heard from a lot of people of like, I can go down this road and it can, I think I had my wife was very supportive, and she was like, hey, Vincenzo, if you want to do another year, like we'll figure it out. And I was like, no, like I want to finish. I just want to finish it now. We left on a good note on the season. I didn't want to take these boys any further. And then, someone else had to, it was only going to get harder for me to say no as I kept going. And so I just kind of
Right.
saw some of those warning signs of like, hey, this is becoming a little bit of a chore at times. This is something that I can't give 100% to. I'm not giving 100% to coaching. I'm not giving 100% to my home. I'm not giving 100% to my ministry. And so if I can't do that, then that was, for me, that was like, okay, it's time to hang it up for a little while. And,
Right.
and again, you know, some people hearing this, they might say, you know what, like this is something that's been weighing on me for a little bit. I just kind of needed that release. Or, for some people, we want you to stay in the coaching field. Like as for FCA, like if you guys don't exist, then our ministry, half of our ministry is gone, right, with coaches. But we want to help you in that. We want to aid you in that. And sometimes it's, maybe we can help you have some of those conversations and just kind of discern and weave through the struggles that you're dealing with, and come to a conclusion one way or the other. But I think those are all great practices that somebody can use. And you kind of said if those aren't working for you, maybe step back and roll. I would almost say if those things aren't working for you, that might even be more telling that it's become a bit of an idol. If you can't, the 4 or 5 things that you listed off, if not one of those things is working, maybe it's the person themselves that needs to reflect and make some changes in their own life.
Yeah. Interesting. We talked about like those signs that this is, because an idol really is anything that you put before God. All right. And I definitely was like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And, I brought that to the Lord, and, Um, so if you're realizing that this is taking the central part of my life, like this is central of my life. So if I was controlling as a coach in terms of not my athletes, like I believe in well-rounded athletes, dude. I want to see I wanted to see kids do all sorts of sports, and coaching year round, I had to be really careful of not trying to have the appearance that I was trying to keep kids for 3 seasons, you know. So I wasn't controlling in the aspect of the athletes, but when it came to practice plans and how practice went and every part of preparation on the team, like I wanted control of it all because if it wasn't, and it was a terrible attitude, but I'm like, well, we won, so and since we're winning, it's working, and since it's working, we're not changing it. But I actually realized about 3 years, 2 years before I was done, I'm like, man, oh, that was unhealthy. Like that was just like I was just clinging on to it, you know, and I didn't want to let anybody else have an opportunity to seize that, you know. So if you're looking at how you're coaching and you're not allowing somebody else on your staff or other people to have influence, like on how you're doing, you know, your job. Yeah, as a head coach, like obviously you make the calls, but for me, that was another sign of I'm clutching the idol and I'm just trying to make sure no one could touch it. And the first big release from this for me was the guy who now is the head coach in my place. I pulled him aside and said, "Hey, listen, I don't know the pole vault, and I'm never going to learn the pole vault. You're going to learn the pole vault, and you're going to coach the pole vault, and I'm going to know nothing about pole vault, and it's yours." And he was like, "Oh, cool." And I'm like, I remember walking away from that situation like, wow, I just gave something to somebody, and like I'm not gonna know anything about it, and I'm okay with that. It was tough.
Yeah. But you trusted him. You trusted him to be able to do that too.
Right,
Right.
right.
And yeah, I think, that goes back to the relational piece that you said in the very beginning. If you have a great relationship with your assistants, you know, you can share some of the stuff like, hey, like guys, like I'm struggling right now. Like I want to let you know, and this is why I need you guys to step up a little bit. And you can have that, that interaction. And vice versa. You'd want your assistants to be able to come to you and tell you the same thing. Hey, Nick, I'm really struggling like at home and stuff like this. Like I need to step back. And I'm sure you would have said yes, right? But it comes
Yep.
back to that relational piece of having those people around you. And this is what we talk about with coaching all the time. It doesn't need to just be X's and the O's, and it shouldn't be, where you should be doing life with these people, your assistants, your teams, your athletes, those people, because when you get to know them personally and they get to know you personally, you can have these deeper conversations. They can hold you accountable. They can step up when you need the help, or vice versa, however, it might land on those people. But that's an awesome example of just, hey, I don't want to know anything about this. I just want to see them fly over that pole at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's it. That's true.
Yeah. All right. So as we kind of wrap up here, Nick, what's, if there's one key takeaway that either you haven't shared yet, or just you really want to hammer down the point to our listeners, coaches that are maybe struggling with this, what would that one thing be?
Well, I would say, um, man, because there's two really small things, but um,
Share them both. You can share both.
I'll share them both then. So one suggestion would be, if you're not sure, or if you're thinking like, all right, like coaching is dominating my life. Um, I've I talk to coaches about this all the time who maybe are struggling with the amount of time they're spending with their coaching. Take some time and just sketch out what your week looks like, and in terms of time blocks, right? Like hour time blocks, and look at how many hours a week you're coaching in comparison to everything else, right? So that can give you like a viewpoint. What I mean by coaching, it's not just like when you're in the office. It's like, look at the amount of time you're spending scheming, or looking at game film, or whatever you're doing, like scouting or whatever it is, right? Look at that and then say, all right, like what does that look like in comparison to the amount of time I'm in the Word or in prayer or with my son, or with my wife, or whatever it is, right? So I think that's one thing that would be good for coaches to do. But the other thing that I actually think is more important, and that's something that's really small, that anyone can do is begin to pray about your purpose. Like start to pray daily about why you're doing this. Are you coaching to bring yourself glory? Are you coaching to bring God glory? And if the answer is not to bring God glory, like that's okay. Like he can work on your heart and he can change how you view coaching to be able to really bring him glory and be incredibly successful as a coach. But pray about your purpose. I think that's real important.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, depending on where you're located, reach out to us, go to fca.org and see who your local, staff representative is, and we can help you. Like this is something that we love to do. Like me and Nick could probably be on this episode. This episode could be a 3-hour episode, to be honest. We could just talk about this stuff. But we want to help you, and we have the resources to help you, and our staff love when you guys reach out to us. And there's many different things. There's just sometimes just conversations, and we can help you navigate some of that stuff. And then other times it's resources and how to connect you. Nick said finding your purpose. One of a great thing you can do, I'll put it in the show notes also, is our 360 coaching course online. It's a short online course. It's a couple of videos, and they give you some tools, and at the very end you create a transformational purpose statement for your coaching, and something that you can utilize and say, this is why I'm coaching, this is how I'm going to coach, right? And kind of shapes that a little bit, and it does help with your priorities and just who you are as a person first, and then who you are as a coach second. So that's something that if you're interested in that'll be in the show notes. But I just think this is a really important topic because we see a lot of coaches can get lost in this. They just they go down that path and then they feel like they're just too far gone to come back, and it's not the case. And we want to make sure from the FCA standpoint, but honestly just from the human being and the Christian standpoint, like we want to make sure that you are you as a coach are filled up on all ends, right? And so if there's something lacking or there's issues in a part of your life because of coaching or whatever it might be, like that's where we want to step in. So we love you, coaches. We want to be there for you guys. We need you guys to stay in the coaching field if that's where you're called to be. And there's ways that we can help you guys go about that. So Nick, thank you again. This was really great, really great. Thank you for sharing your story and for giving us some practical tips. I hope our listeners, I know our listeners are going to take a lot out of this. So thank you.
Man, thanks I love doing this kind of stuff. It was fun.
Yeah. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.